Hello everyone, I'm Tesseract. Today I'm joined by Farmer Bob.
God, it's like Anne here.
Zhouz. Kristyana.
Is obviously the joke. Today we're going to be going over advanced raiding tactics, or what we do when we're raiding, what you can do to improve your own raiding abilities. So the first thing we're going to talk about is when you're going into, before you even get into the raid, how you set up your group. So there's obviously so many different ways you can set up those 8 players. And the most obvious one is the good old 2-2-2-2, 2 of each role. And there's been a thread on the forums for months, I think, about making this format viable again. And I always thought that was a really interesting title because it is in fact the most viable of any of the setups. The only time that the setup doesn't work is when there is strict DPS checks in the game, when you have to put out the DPS in order to down bosses before bad stuff happens, before they enrage, before more ads start spawning. That's the only time when 2-2-2-2 isn't viable. Every other point, it is the safest and most viable group you're going to get, purely because you can afford to lose any single role and still have one left. On top of that, with 2 tanks, you have the ability to tank 2 different bosses if there are 2 bosses. You can, if something needs to be pulled away from something else, you have a tank that can do that. In the most recent hard raids lockdown, there's a boss that will teleport to the furthest member of the group and he'll do an attack, which if you're still there, it will just kill you, unless you're a tank. So you can either leave that to another group member and hope that they can avoid the attacking time, or if you've got another tank there, they'll just soak up that damage, it'll just be dead easy. So it's a solid group format. You've got backup for basically everything. It will be slow, that is the downside, and that's why most people don't run it.
So the first thing people do when they want the content to end faster is they substitute a tank for a DPS. And pretty common 1-3-2-2. 1 tank, 3 DPS, 2 healers, and 2 controllers. 2 healers to keep healing the DPS that are taking stuff down. 2 controllers to keep the power and the pickups and everything going on. But taking it down to 1 tank is probably the next most common setup, just because there's not a lot of content in the game that required 2 tanks, and for a long time it was actually difficult, I know these guys will know, for tanks to cooperate in content. But now with the ability to taunt off each other with single target taunts, that's possible. It's just with DPS checks and some content, it makes sense to drop a tank and add a DPS as another option.
Then sometimes the next setup that a lot of people do is if it's content that you're fairly familiar with, or it's content where you know you have even harder DPS checks and you just want to get it done, you'll then end up dropping a healer and taking the 4th DPS. So you end up with 1 of each role. You end up with the 1-4-2 setup, 2 controllers, 1 healer. So in that point, a lot of times the healer is the next to go, because when you have hard-hitting content, there comes to a point where having extra restoration or having extra healer is kind of superfluous if the tank is the only one taking damage and everyone else gets 1 shot. So at that time you can do it because if you absolutely need to burn something down fast, or even if you don't, you just want to get through the content much quicker. It's kind of the same way as, and weapon mastery really helps out with that as well, because you're only running with 2 controllers.
Right, so another group makeup or setup that you don't often see it for approaching new content, so it's not 100% like usable when you're approaching just new raids, but you do see it sometimes, less now these days with weapon mastery, but it was quite common for a while, is instead of having 4 DPSs and 2 trollers, is 3 DPSs and triple trollers. So it's about the balance of damage per second. You're trading away a lot of power efficiency for just slightly increased DPS, just to essentially burn things down quicker. It sort of came up with Ocean Crisis, got really common on some servers. Less common these days, and usually even in previous DLCs, not very common for brand new raids, simply because of the volatility of that group makeup.
There's also, I think, our guys back on EU have just done a lockdown run, which was in 19 minutes. And I think they ran 5 DPS, and then 1 tank, 1 healer, 1 controller. And that's only really come about because the changes with weapon mastery has made power, there's so much more of it available, so 1 really good controller can keep that going. So I think that's what they ran for that. I think there's been a couple of other groups testing that one out as well. But that's, you really have to trust your guys to be putting out the best there. What's really interesting now though is armories have changed this completely, and we saw that most in survival mode, where you wanted as much burn as possible to get through those bosses as quickly as you could, but there were points when you needed 2 tanks or more, and you needed 2 healers. And so armories allowed you to take power sets into the raid and have them switch between one and another. So now it's not just you have to go in with a specific group setup. Now you can play about with it a lot. Each boss you can take on in a different way. But the most important thing about group makeup is don't do what we do, and don't do what Fami does, and don't do what Select Few, One Piece, or whoever that's going out and doing these speedruns do. Do what works for you. This is, we know our players, we know what we can do, we know the damage we put out, we know how many controllers we need to fuel those DPS, to fuel the healers, to fuel the tanks. We know what works for us, but there's no point in you trying to do that if you don't have those people. We used to find, on EU side, we never ran with 3 controllers in Origin Crisis. We trusted the 4 DPS to do the damage and 2 controllers to power it. Whereas on US side, there was a lot of people that had 3 really strong DPS that they just wanted to power. And that was a huge difference between the 2 servers. And neither server caved to the other, neither said one is better or worse. It worked for us and it worked for them. So that's the group makeup. I mean, it's work on your own team, figure out what works for you.
So if we go into, once we have the group set up, figured out, and we kind of talk about what we're going to do in the content itself, first thing that's going to come up is the role responsibilities. So you have your 8 people, and you want to make sure each person knows what's expected of them. And this is especially important in newer content. I'll give Lockdown as an example. Tessa's already talked about how there's a boss that has a mechanic where he'll jump the farthest player away. You want your tank or your controller, or whoever's doing that, to know what to do. So just going in as an awareness thing, knowing who's responsible for different aspects of the raid is important. But it's also important that all 8 people know their role and what they're supposed to be doing. So the tanks, if you're going in 2, know who's being the main tank to taunt the boss, and who's pulling the group of bags, or who's taunting who off one another. In survival mode, that was important. If you have 2 controllers, I'm a controller myself, we do have that override issue. You can't both be throwing pot all the time, or you're going to starve the group. So you need to know who's doing that and who's going to be more focused on maybe debuffing or crowd controlling or something. So you need communication between those roles. Healers, you want to make sure that you have 2 tanks separated from one another. Is one going to focus on one tank and they'll be in range of them, and one's going to focus on the group or the other tank and be in range of them. So there's all this communication that needs to happen. DPS need to be communicating with the group as well, because you don't want them so focused on damage that they don't know what's going on around them. I
mean, aside from that as well, there's also that each role has certain responsibilities, and depending on your group makeup, things like, not even your specific role responsibilities, but who's going to do pickups. Now, if somebody drops at your feet, you pick them up. But what if you're a solo healer and the tank's taking damage? Somebody's died at your feet, there's a guy nearby. You've got to trust your teammates that they're going to come in and get that pickup, because if you stop healing that tank, it could be a wipe for the team. So it's not just your the role itself and mechanics, but how that role interacts with the raid itself. Who's going to be doing what, who's going to be hitting the switches, who's going to be getting the reses, who's standing where, and that kind of leads on to where the group operates.
And yeah, one of the largest things about that when it comes to group efficiency is group positioning. There are certain things that, depending on your role, you want to make sure that you're doing. The tank is usually always in melee range, especially now they have to be, because right now you can't range tank because range taunts are a little bit broken. Hopefully they'll get fixed soon, they know the issue. But yeah, I mean, you want to make sure that you don't get in the way of other players, or if someone goes down, everyone runs over to him and groups up until the person gets around. So you have like healers and a lot of DPS usually in the back, unless it's a boss that you know that you can melee. And as a result of that, you want to make sure that you're spaced out just enough where you still get hit with all the heals, the AoE stuff and everything, but at the same time, if a boss ends up anything except like a one-shot ray or a huge cone AoE, you want to make sure that you're not close enough to anybody else where you get hit by an attack that they get hit with, or they get hit with an attack where you are. And sometimes, especially as a tank, we have an advantage that we can do that, where if we're doing a tank and spank, what I do, and I know a lot of other tanks do, is we turn our camera around. We lock onto the boss, and we'll turn around where we can actually face the group, and we can see the group positioning. And if we say, hey healer, you're a little bit too close to the DPS, or hey, you need to back up, and that's a responsibility that basically everyone has. We need to know where they are in relation to other players. And you got to make sure you're not blocking anybody else, because we've had that happen too, where two people be close to each other, and here comes the big attack. They'll both roll into each other. No one goes anywhere, and they both die. So yeah, that's another thing you really got to look out for.
Or like in the lockdown at the moment, you can have people getting aura on them. They can't be near other people. You have to keep the group spread out, and it can be really helpful for the tanks to be the ones calling that out, because the rest of us, we're busy picking up rifles or rezzing dead teammates.
So that comes back to role responsibility. Like it's not exactly built into the tank role that the tank has to call out positioning, but if you're just like in the center blocking and you're looking out at the group, like take advantage of your vantage point and help your players stand in the right places or get out of the long places and sort of keep the group going forward without too many problems or like struggle. You don't want to overload your healers with unnecessary healing. It's just a matter of like standing slightly to the left, which is common, and sometimes, especially with like you mentioned, DPSs will focus in on what they're doing, and they won't notice that they're standing in an AoE that is like taking at their health.
Or sometimes too, especially in survival mode, you get fights that go on really long. Sometimes graphics don't render for other players. We've run into that. So if you see like a big circle on the floor, like Brainiac's about to do an orbital strike or something like that, and your teammate's not, your teammate might not see it because the graphic might not be rendering for that. This is a really big issue on the PS3. So that always helps.
And it can even come down to the tank being right up in the boss's face. They can see the boss animations. And I found with lockdown that you don't wait for the boss to teleport, because if you do, you're dead. If he teleports and he gets to you, you've got no time to get out of there unless you can teleport.
Shameless plug.
alive! Yeah, so you have to watch the boss mechanic. Is in that particular move, the boss, you'll jump to someone else, you'll stop, he'll turn to who he's going to teleport to, you'll do this mechanic, then he teleports. So when you see him doing this, that's when you start moving, and not when the actual animation is on. But a lot of the animations, we've got a lot of the outlines and things to make it much easier, but it can still get really cluttered on the screen. And so the tanks can really help with calling that out, saying, right, there's this attack incoming. Everybody can be really aware and be ready to move.
Yeah, and so in new content, quite often, you won't know what the best place to stand is yet. You'll be new to a room, new to a boss, you don't know what the mechanic is, you don't know what the dangers are, and people will die. So sometimes the people out in the field don't know what killed them. And if your tank can see it, or if someone else can see it, and sort of give advice or give a pointer like, I think this was what killed you, that'll help your group positioning basically at that point, to sort of optimize, as I said before, and just reduce the amount of like damage you're taking, and sort of help you through it with less struggle, or help you through it at all if it's something that's just difficult to complete.
A part of it as well is we've run on EU side, we've run with static teams for a long time, and I was with the same group of about 4 or 5 players for a good couple of years. And when you run with the same people, you get into, I think you guys talked about this before, a previous panel, is a synergy to the group. You get to know who does what, you get to do a lot of stuff about shorthand, all the stuff that we're talking about, you have to decide beforehand, who's doing pickups and stuff. You'll get into this with your group, and it can be really, really helpful to run with the same people. Not just, obviously, everybody has their pug horror stories, but a lot of that comes from unskilled players. But a lot of it just comes from playing with people that you don't play well with, or playing with people that you've just never played with before, so you don't know what to expect from them. So we find it's really, really useful to run with static teams, and I know the US side has been setting up static teams as well.
I've always been a fan of it myself on the US side, so I was adamant that we implement it. We formed Odyssey on the US server. A lot of it for me is a trust issue. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in the game pugging, and you're never 100% sure what the other 7 people are going to do when you pug a group. When you form a static, there's more trust. I know what my other controller is going to do. I can trust that they're going to be on pickups, or I can trust that they're not going to drop pod, or I can trust my healers that I can trust that Phelps is going to die. I can trust that the healer is going to save me, and that the tank that we're running with is going to keep aggro. So forming a static and getting used to the way people run is pretty important. Like, I know the tank's going to be calling things out that we can't see because of animations, and that's really beneficial. So,
and for the developer side of things, running static, weekly logging in, keeps you in the game. I mean, my static kind of finished just after War of Light Part 1 came out. We ran through that content, and then we just kind of stopped. We were kind of lacking stuff, and we thought we'll take a break. When we took a break from it, we stopped logging into the game entirely. So it can keep you going in the game. It keeps you. It's that kind of weekly seeing the same people. You get a really good kind of bond with these people. You get to really like them. You go to faraway places and meet up with them and things like that.
We're not in your static. What?
No. But I did that last year with our guys.
And I mean, and when we talk about static, obviously it helps with the large league, but if you're in a smaller league or not everyone can get around, the same concepts we're talking about, like, I'm sure everybody has the go-to 3 or 4 people on their friends list, like, hey, I need a controller, or hey, can we find a tank? And, even if you're not in the same leagues, everyone has other people that they run with, and you know exactly what their play style is going to be. And that helps a lot when it comes to, challenging content.
Right, so being an excellent player is important, obviously, but having excellent players that you know well, or you can rely on, just reduces the number of variables you're taking into, especially something unknown.
Aside from the advanced rating kind of aspect of it, it just adds to the fun of it.
Sure.
If you're actually playing with people that you play with a lot, and you enjoy spending time with them, and you enjoy playing the game.
I think, to kind of keep in this communication section, the number one thing to remember about this game is that it's an MMO. You are playing with other players. And so, while it's great that you have a lot of skill, if you're not communicating with one another, if you're not kind of sharing what you know, you're not going to do as well. Yeah, if you have 8 people that 100% know the raid perfectly, you're probably going to go in, not need to talk to each other at all, whether typing or voice, and complete it. But when you're doing new content, communication, being able to say, I saw this is what happened, whether you know the folks you're running with or not, is going to make or break you. In the end, is I think what we're saying here is that being able to talk about what you're seeing and being able to learn from what others are saying is going to be the best end result.
And moving on from that.
Right. So, all right. So, sort of following along the line of communicating with each other. Sometimes you have no idea what's going on. You go in, and it's overwhelming. It's a whole new place, or maybe it's a place you've been to before. But you're doing your thing. You're the DPS, and you're burning it down. Or you're the tank, and you're just blocking and taunting like you normally do. And something happens, and nobody knows what happened. And it happens all the time. Like you're cruising along, and you wipe, and nobody knows why. So it's important to sort of keep track of just what are you doing? What are you doing? What's everyone else doing? So reducing the number of variables, just having awareness of where you're standing. Is this effect? Is it damaging? Is it buffing me? Like in Nexus, when those white pools came out, nobody knew what the. I think even now, like, sometimes people don't know what they do. So it's like, do I stand in it? Do I not stand in it? Like, make a conscious decision. Don't let the game decide for you. Sort of.
About pulling back from that tunnel vision. Try to. Obviously, you do have to focus a lot on it, but be aware of stuff. And as we said earlier, the tanks, watch out for other people. They've got a role where they can do that a bit more. But it's not just about that. You can be watching out for not just yourself, but for the rest of the team as well.
Right, and you can also learn. Well, like you mentioned, you don't wait for it to hit you before you do something about it. So start learning what the tells are. There are always tells.
Call them out if you can. If you've got voice communication.
Yeah, call them out.
That's a huge amount.
And help each other. Don't let your DPS die and then blame him for dying if you could have called it out before. Especially if you know that he's in the middle of something else. If your main controller is picking someone up that's fallen, and the boss goes to do something that you know is lethal, don't just wait for it to happen. Like, pick up on these things and help each other through it. Keep an eye on your environment, on your bosses, and on your team. Like help each other through it. It's not PvP. So.
And this can all just help with, if you've gone into content new for the first time, and you're trying to figure out the content, you need to try and figure out mechanics and what's going on. And you need to be that much more aware of what's going on if things go wrong. You have to be able to be aware of these things to figure out what the mechanics are.
But I think definitely in the new raids, if you're playing the Halls of Power stuff, there's some stuff that you can key in on. I know the first couple of times we ran things, even on the test server, we're looking for symbols. So that awesome chevron that we saw, the skull attack that you learned on the Brainiac ship, those make a return. And so when you're in the boss fight, you see them, and you're in RTS all the time, you're like, incoming, block, don't be in the way of that. So you want to call out things that you think are going to be mechanics that the entire group want to know. The counter symbols, people that have those in effect, being able to call those out, to keep the group with immunities or not give the boss immunities is important. Also, Zhouz was talking a bit about dying and how to learn from that. Clearly, we're not DPS because we keep saying DPS, don't die. One of my biggest worries when we are in new content is that I won't have my league chat up, or group chat, because I'm in RTS, obviously, but the tab I have open is always the combat log. Always, always, always. And I have it huge. Like, I probably have it way bigger than I should be watching the screen. But, or if I die, I open this and this is what I check first. What hit me? What killed me? I thought I saw it on the screen, but I want to make sure that I know what killed me. Was it somebody else's aura? Was it the boss? Did I stand in an AoE? What happened? So that's very important. Especially like when we were learning the aura for lockdown, I was like, what killed me? And I thought it was the boss did some attack. And I'm like, no, my teammate killed me.
The boss says the healer killed me.
Right, so, trying to figure that out. Why did the healer kill me? Or why did, I think we had multiple times that Rage DPS were like, I didn't have an aura. And I was like, I'll call him out by name. He's like, Tesseract, you killed me. And he's like, I didn't kill you. And he's like, I just had the buff on. And I was like,
that wasn't a buff. That wasn't a buff.
So being able to check your combat log, whether it's having it open while you fight, which is probably distracting, or if your group wipes, it'll keep the last couple of things that happen. I know it scrolls pretty fast, which is disappointing, but you can go back and see the damage that was done to you to see what killed you or what killed your group members. I find that very handy.
Number of times that you've been convinced it's a bug and you go in the combat log and realise you've just missed what the mechanic was.
Yeah.
I mean, another tip that helps if you're going to look at the combat log, there are a couple of really great parsing programs online, but a lot of people don't even bother to clean it out. So I'd be willing to bet a couple people here have a combat log that's maybe over 1 gigabyte in size. So before you go into a new raid, and you're trying to figure out the mechanics, just go into it, make sure you delete it, and it'll make things so much easier to actually figure out the mechanics, like what actually hit you, instead of scrolling down through thousands upon thousands of pages.
Right. So
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if people know what Chris is talking about here. Obviously, if you log out of the game, you're thinking my combat log is white, it's clean when I log in. It actually saves it to a file on your computer that you can go back and check when you're not even in the game. You can go back, and people have made programs online that you can go back and throw your combat log, and it'll tell you your damage and stuff that you can look at later. But you can open it up, and it looks like a notepad file that you can read through what happened during past game times.
on the PC.
On the PC.
Sorry.
If you're on the PS, don't ever log out of the game or you lose.
Hang on, I'm gonna look at, well, with link death, maybe they'll fix that.
We're not going to talk about link death.
I think a lot of these parsing programs that are out there, I think they all started from ones that were looking for what items you were getting from lockboxes.
Yeah.
That's
how the big one started.
But yes, that's when I first found it. It was like, oh, you've got this log? Really? Oh, it's got everything here. Yeah, that was good. So the other thing that you can do, and again, this is easier on PC. PS4 is probably...
A lot of people are like streaming and everything now.
Yeah, video. We mentioned a bit earlier about Nexus. The very first time we did the last boss of Nexus, and this was on the FNL stream, way back in the beginning, and that was the very first time anyone had ever seen the inevitability attack. And I was recording at the time, and I got the white shield that blocks inevitability, and I survived the attack. And so obviously we all died horribly. The first thing I did was I loaded up the video, and I watched the video, and I was like, why did I survive? And then realised I had this white shield on me. So that was one time it took us doing that to see this white shield. Usually, if it's not bugged, blocks inevitability. And so the importance of that was, it was just huge for that. It meant we weren't running it ages and ages and ages before we finally figured it out. Video can be so good just for it's like the combat log, checking what it was that was right. You didn't see it because you were concentrating too hard. You were sure you didn't have the aura, or nobody around you had the aura. You go back and check, actually, no, I had the aura,
It's something nobody noticed. I mean, it's something, especially when it's the first time in a room, it's easy to miss some of these effects. Particularly with like a lot of the player spawned effects that they're doing to try to kill things. Nobody will see something and you could be at it for hours and not see it until you queue up the video later the next day, and then how did we miss that? It's so obvious.
And also as well for actually identifying when some things are bugs, being sure that you've missed it, or just not being aware if it is you that's doing it wrong, or if it is genuinely something wrong with the game. There's quite a few times we've found bugs like that where we've looked at the video and gone, no, this is video proof that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and it's just not working. So we'll fire that off to the devs and hopefully they'll fix it. But yeah, if you can at all, it can be really, really handy to have these videos just to go over everything that's been going on.
It's kind of like the sporting world realm. So people in sports go back and watch video replays to learn mechanics of other teams and to learn what to do in upcoming games. So video, there's so much going on in game. Like if you're a DPS, there's so many numbers bouncing around on your screen, and same for healers that are healing massively, and controllers trying to watch ticks go off on their screen. There's so many things going on in your screen at once that even checking the combat log for what killed you, I mean, you're going to get up if somebody can res you, and you're going to go again. Like that combat log, while it's useful for a wipe to tell what wiped you, immediately it's not always useful because it scrolls so fast. So many things are in it that scrolling up, you may not get most of the boss fights that will happen. So video allows you to go back and kind of, especially if you have a player that will let you mess with the speed settings, to go back and really dissect what happened during that 5-minute fight and see.
With the rocket launcher?
That would be the rocket launcher.
Don't worry, it wasn't loaded.
Part of it fell apart.
So yeah. the video really lets you go back and dissect what happened more so than even the combat log can, because you can see positioning and you can see the visual of something that you may have missed the first time. Or we've used videos to go back and pull screenshots off of to show other people. Like the aura was one of them. This is actually what it looked like. I had it. I knew it was me. Post it for other people.
Video also helps to get fresh eyes on it. So let's say your group that you went in there with, like is struggling, or it's just not something you're able to complete. You can cue the video for someone who you trust or you know knows mechanics really well, and they might be able to tell you something that you're overlooking, and you don't always have that opportunity.
And leading on from that, I mean, it's not just about you, it's about your group. You're not just looking for the effects on yourself. You're watching out, again, this awareness thing. You're figuring out what's happening to the rest of your group.
So that's only good for once you're out of a raid and you have a chance afterwards. But a lot of times during the middle of it, after a wipe, you go, what went wrong? Because sometimes you don't have time to analyze the entire video right away. You don't have time to exit and pull up the combat logger and go back and scroll. So it has to do with basically teaching the group or reaching out to the group. And this is where having a static or having a set group of people that you run with all the time really helps. Because a lot of people don't really take to any type of advice you want to give them in the game. Even if it's, hey, could you not stand in the fire, the big circle of death on the floor, and the response will be, well, the healer should have healed me through it, and they'll initiate a vote kick. I'm sure we've all had that happen.
Or telling the tank where to stand.
Yes.
Never tell a tank where to stand.
But it has to do with the whole thing because, the people in the group when you're approaching new content, they have to be mature enough to know that they're going to wipe, and they have to know that sometimes you're just going to make a big mistake, like, if Button hits the wrong armory button, and, he's done that before in the middle of a fight. But you got to understand that you're all in there to learn. You know you're going to go in there. You know you're going to wipe. And if someone says something to you, like, if I'm DPSing and I die, maybe I had tunnel vision, I didn't see what was going on, and if someone else saw it, I shouldn't get angry if they point out, hey, during the next run, can you maybe watch where you were standing, or can you maybe stand a little closer to the healer, or, can you run and hit the timer this time? So you have to be able to reach your group, and you have to know the people that you're running with to make sure that,
everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, everyone's on the same page, and you don't get people that get pissed off.
It can help identify more long-term issues with it. So, you might have one person who will make a mistake, and that will make you wipe for one of them. But if it turns out that one person is making you wipe by doing the same thing every single time, then that's an issue that you have to deal with. And whether that's helping that person to get past whatever it is, or if it is simply just, dropping that person from the group. If you're not going to be able to run that content with that person because they keep doing the same thing that keeps wiping the group, then that's something that you're going to have to deal with. And recording all this, making sure each time you wipe that you're checking combat log, that you're identifying these issues, that can help with identifying the larger issues within your group.
Right, and you also can't blame someone who doesn't have an idea or any clue for a mistake. I mean, everyone, especially with new stuff, like everyone's going to make mistakes. If you have somewhat of an idea and they don't, if you don't teach them, it's your fault just as much as theirs, if not more, because them not knowing something's killing them.
Right, there was a point in time that you were new to that content. There was a point in time that you ran it first. And so how did you learn this stuff? And if this is their first time in it, how do you expect them to learn it? I mean, it's giving the advice. It's not like it hurts you anymore. It's not like you're not going to injure your loot now. So, so it only benefits you to help your group.
Apparently they can get the rings of OP if they're doing particularly badly.
Oh, yes.
Oh, right, yes. If you are on the bottom of the score list, apparently that's how
You will get the epic.
That's not how I got mine, by the way.
This is like shameless plug after shameless plug after shameless.
I've done two.
Case in point.
Okay, everybody gets a shameless plug.
I got one.
Tali got two and destroyed one.
That's sad.
So that kind of gives you the idea of what you can do internally within your 8 people. But there's also you might go in that first time and your entire group is like, we've been in here 2 hours. I'm getting kind of sick of wiping over and over. Let's take a break for now and walk away. So there are things you can do after the fact, like complete the after the fact, which you either completed or kind of decided to take a break on how to proceed from there.
So there are things you can do outside of the raid to help you get through the next time. And one of those things you can do, especially with like really brand new stuff, is reach out to the player base, or just like snoop on them. Go see what other people are doing that is working that you haven't tried yet, or that that you just haven't thought of yet. Maybe someone has figured out a mechanic that you didn't even know was in there. Or maybe someone has changed their group composition just to sort of combat some of the problems that you're encountering. Check out what the community is doing. It doesn't mean that you have to just do it the way they're doing it, but sometimes you can get an idea that will just give you a leg up and make it through to the next step or through to the end. Or just pass a roadblock that you were stuck at because all of your ideas didn't work panning out. And sometimes the ideas don't have to be for the whole group or for the group makeup, but it's just one person is doing something that we didn't have we didn't have anyone doing that one thing. Like the person standing in the back, so that it's always like, a little bit more predictable, a little bit less variable, and just that little bit of a change can make it, or break the race.
And I think that seeing what else the community is doing, the biggest thing that this has recently been shown is in survival mode, because everybody goes in there with different groups, different setups. They get to different rounds. Some rounds are more effective. Some groups are more effective with a different setup. But if it works, it works. And you might be able to think of some things that you haven't had a chance to, because it's very easy for yourself to get, as a group, to get pretty big with tunnel vision because you're so used to doing things a certain way. So if you run with other people or you watch videos or see how they're doing, you're like, oh wow, they did it with this setup, or wow, they did it with this power set. It's only going to help you become a better player.
Right. So there's some different ways you can go about this whole learning from the community. I know, not to pick on Chris for a second, but he had some time in game where he didn't mesh well with some of our timings for a little while, and so he plugged some content for results. And so there were times that he would come back with feedback on, they were trying this, we should try this. And so that's real common. I'm usually pretty into running things as hard as possible, as seem to like to do things the difficult way. So the way we might go into a raid the first time, somebody else might plug it and be like, this group did this and it actually worked better than what we tried, so let's try this. So if you run with groups other than one you normally run, or you're plugging often, you might pick up on things that they find. It's just like bug testing. Not everybody's going to do powers or do things the same way, and they'll find different bugs. So people will find loopholes or ways to make content easier for the group. And you're going to notice that if you're running with multiple groups. So that's one way which you can kind of figure out what the community is doing. That's a pretty small sample group, though. Obviously, 4 servers. You're not playing on all 4. You're not going to get the entire player base. But they did merge our forums, so you can check the forums. People are always putting up guides or info or asking if they think this is a legit tactic. So I encourage, I'm sure this is preaching to the choir for the people here, but I encourage people to use the forums. We all use them. There's tons of information on powers and sets and alerts and raids and to get help on how to run all of them.
Even 90% is wrong.
Yeah. So, well, you can look up.
Don't believe it all, but you should read it.
So, you could look for things that people are doing, and if there's no one's talked about it, just make a thread and say, this is where we're getting stuck. Like, what are we doing wrong? And you'll get flamed. But then someone will say something like obvious that you may have overlooked, or just give you a hint, or offer to come in game and help you.
I remember we were convinced that the feat in Nexus, where you have to take the boss down without the volatile robots exploding,
Yeah, volatile.
we were convinced there was a mechanic to that.
No.
Apparently it was just a DPS burner.
Burn.
But we were sure, we were trying everything we could, and someone posted up on the forum saying, has anybody got this yet? Because we don't know how to do it. When we went in, our DPS was nowhere near what we needed to actually do that. And so we were trying all this other stuff because we thought maybe you do something to stop them exploding. But we put that post out there, we found it, nobody else has got it either. So either it is this ridiculously complicated mechanic, or it's just a DPS burn.
Another great example of that, it was a while back, but I know everyone here remembers, was when if anyone was here when Floss 3 launched, and they had the medics and they had the snipers, and everyone was trying to figure out the mechanics of that. Like, I remember deliberately going into a raid and thinking, oh wow, he's got the shield up, we have to burn him down through it. And that didn't work. Or how many people would say, don't put your pets, or no flying in the final room in Floss 2.
That one works though.
Yeah, and it's great because you can go on the forums and you can discuss it, and you could talk back and forth with people about and you can all figure out the mechanics together, which is really cool to do.
So this isn't so much the kind of advanced raiding stuff again, but this is just, as Odyssey, what we've always found is that it's not enough to just figure out all of this. We're telling you that you need to, we're going out there and talking to the community and see what they're doing and see what everybody else is doing, but you can only research what's there. And so we've always felt that when you do know this stuff, you kind of have a responsibility to put it out there as well. So that's why we're always putting out guide videos or writing up threads on the forums or just helping people out. You're always welcome to ask us questions and we can help out where we can. But we feel that that's part of the responsibility of figuring this stuff out. It's not just about us getting firsts and being the only ones that are doing things. It's about helping other people to do it as well. So that's what we've got.
Yeah, I mean, helping people through it, it can only come back to you the next time you pug. If the people in that pug watched one of the videos that you put out a week ago, and because of that, they all knew how to beat it. It helps you. It helps the people who are playing your game to have fun, to beat the content, to progress along, and everyone just gets better and stronger and move forward as a group, as a whole community.
So, do you guys have questions for us? Not everybody all at once.
What's your favorite raid you run all the time?
I have to think. Pause 2.
Yeah.
But honestly, Origin Crisis, I love both of those. I love the final room in Nexus. It's just, I love that inevitability mechanic. It's one of my favourite mechanics in the entire game. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Figuring it out and getting it all sorted and all the different ways, all the different Batmen, the different Luthers that can change how that room plays out, the different artifacts. I thought it was really good. But I thought Paradox was the best designed raid they've ever done. And it hurts me that it gets so much hatred on the forums. But I thought, this is my message to the devs, I thought that was a really, really well designed raid. It did go out with a lot of bugs, which would have helped if it didn't, but you asked us to test Nexus, so we tested Nexus.
Paradox is on something else. I would love to say one of the Origin Crisis. I probably farmed those a little too much that I'm sick of them at this point. I actually still love going into the first two Batcave raids, Outer and Inner. I don't even know that I can pick between them, but I run them still. Like, I'll solo them now just to go back in them. So 4 tiers there, I still love them.
I'm a huge fan of Paradox. I spent a lot of time in there, so it's hard not to grow to love it or hate it, but and both. But sort of just the flexibility of if you're going with a group that isn't as strong, just try closing tunnels and get your marks. But if you are strong, don't close any tunnels. That sort of scalability without.
Choose your own adventure. We're a fan of the seat names in there as well, actually. We quite like those.
I'm probably going to surprise some people with this because I know it's really obsolete now, but I think as far as the most fun raid in terms of mechanics and everything else, I got to go with Kandak.
The door.
Yes.
The best mechanic in the game.
But the reason being is because, there's so many different parts, everything's intricate, and everybody has something to do. Because, you go in, you fight the water keepers, you gotta protect the rock, and you gotta do it a couple times. Then you have to turn the things at the same time. So you have to make sure, okay, 3 people go in while the rest of the group distracts them. Pharaoh Gazina, his mechanics and everything else, and then finally, the way that, Black Adam switches in the middle of the fight and you have to change tactics through it.
I think even to this day, with the vast health pools we've got, DPS
Every-
is so full of themselves that they think that they can bully Black Adam when he's in his Zatanna face.
Every time Black Adam kills a T6 player, an angel gets its wings.
Yes.
No, but it's really hard. There's been a couple raids that I feel have come close to it, namely FOSS 2 and A and B for the most part. Because
A and B was good.
A and B was very refreshing when it came to mechanics and things that people had to do that relied on skill. That wasn't about how fast can you feed power, how fast can you burn something down. So that was my.
I think that last boss in A and B was really good for controllers.
Yeah, that was a.
Yes, as a controller, thank you so much for giving us something to finally do in a boss fight.
You mean?
Decisive recharge?
Yes. As much as I love throwing my fist in the air. Any other questions?
Or comments or stories?
Please.
Okay, so in a static situation, it works out pretty well. If you have, if you're going into our let's say you're going into new content that it just launched, and let's say your static group is not on, and you still want to test the waters, how would you approach the content to begin with?
You are a brave soul. I'd say even going in with my static the first time, going into something the first time on the test server, my mindset is I'm probably going to wipe about 20 times. Like you have to go in with the mindset that I don't know what's going to happen and I can't be expected to complete this immediately. So you have to be prepared that you're either going to have to take the time to learn it or it might not complete the first time. But I think I'm going to go back to the communication part. Even if you don't know them, the group chat feature is in the game. So even if you're not using voice chat, you have the chat window. And so if you see something that kills you, share it with the group so that they know what to look for. I mean, everything you tell each other only is going to benefit you. It's only going to make you more aware during the time. So
Communication is just huge in new stuff. It's just, you cannot beat it. You could go in with fantastic players, but if they're not talking to each other.
Yeah, so a lot of that is mindset. Go in knowing that wiping is not a reason for you to get really, really mad and start raging at the other players. And if one of the other players starts raging, know where they're coming from and don't let it ruin your experience because it's new content and you're not meant to be there right now. So that's attitude has a lot to do with it too. So I would say prepare yourself if you're going in with not your static or not.
And if they really, really rage and just leave, you were better off without.
And don't tweet spell.
You talked about going on test and playing mid-range spec and like, do you go in there underbuild or do you go overbuild?
We tend to
go underbuild usually 80%.
We tend to go in and buy everything we can and then run it. So if the devs have put up new gear, we will buy new gear and we will go in as we are.
I would say the very first time we run it with the devs, and that's just kind of make sure we can see the mechanics, that we're not going to get one shot immediately, so that we know test, it doesn't matter if we complete it, because obviously we don't keep anything, but our goal, we have a bunch of players that enjoy testing. They love to go in and see the mechanics and try to find bugs, and so they want to get to the end to see what could be the problem. We do have a couple of people that are pretty adamant about going back later to make sure that it's at an appropriate level. That
we do that a lot, even just doing things on building side as well, because we do try, and I know we don't do it as much as we do hero side stuff, but I think all of the past 3 or 4 DLCs that we've had out, we've gone and we've got building characters and we test building side as well.
Usually we try to go in at 80% first 1, 2, or 3 runs and then build it.
We went back for lockdown and we took tanks that were, we wanted to make sure that they could go in normal gear, like 92 or 90 gear, and see if they can do it. And so we definitely like to go back and see if it's going to be over, like one-shotting us immediately, if we're going to have to gear up for it, if folks are going to have to gear up for it. It's definitely something we like to look at.
Yeah, it's, because like you said, you're trying to test 2 different things. And sadly, a lot of people that actually go on test server, and I know anyone in the back there can back me up on this, they'll be like, oh, this content's way too easy. And then you find out, well, you bought all the brand new gear, you put in tier 6 synthetic mods, and of course you blew through it in 15 minutes. That's not what that's designed for. So you can only, it does help if you have the ability to like survive certain attacks and whatnot when you're trying to figure out, hey, does this mechanic work? Is this mechanic broken? Because there was a lot of stuff that wasn't working properly in survival mode. And we could only figure that out by gearing up in full tier 6 and going through it. But then, yeah, you do want to test it at the appropriate level because, maybe this might just be a little too hard. Not saying you might need a nerf, or just nerf it into the ground, but
you might need to account for that in your group makeup or in your tactic, just
I think I remember Odyssey Stable, one of our really top DPS guys, going back recently and gearing up an alt and going into the Sons of Trigon duels, I think, at appropriate level because he was gearing up his alt. And when they'd been released, he was already beyond that. And so it released, he thought they were a bit easy. And going in at level, he actually came out and said, you know what, those are actually quite difficult. I'll do that.
It also helps too when the content goes live, where when you're trying to form a group or people are forming groups, that you have a reasonable idea that okay, well it says you need CR 100 to enter. You might it's very hard to beat at CR 100, but you don't need 106 in order to do it. So you can bring people that are a little bit less geared. Because, at a certain point, gear doesn't count for skill. I mean, the only thing CR really tells you is how big a hit you can take. And I've been in groups that have been at CR 100, or at the bare minimum CR. They've gone smoother than people that are completely decked out with the best endgame gear.
Those are always fun.
Yeah.
Anything else, or is Max going to take us away?
It's time. Hey, thanks. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah.